Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be posting here, but here I am. My name's Eric, 36M, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect life. My wife, Jessica, 34F, and I have been married for 10 years. We have 2 kids, Megan, 10F, and Brandon, 8M, a nice home, and what I believed was a stable marriage. Turns out, I was living in a fantasy. Jessica and I met through mutual friends in our late 20s. She was smart, confident, and had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. I fell hard and fast, and within a year, we were married. Life felt like a dream for the first few years. She was an incredible mom, a supportive partner, and my best friend. Or so I thought. Over the past year, I started noticing changes in Jessica. Small things at first. She was more distant, her affection seemed forced, and she always seemed distracted. Her phone became her constant companion, and any time I walked into the room, she'd quickly lock the screen. I brushed it off at first, telling myself she was just stressed. She worked as a freelance graphic designer and often had tight deadlines. But there were other signs I couldn't ignore. She started going out more, girls' nights, she called them, and would come back late, smelling like expensive perfume I didn't recognize. When I asked her about it, she'd laugh and say, "Eric, you're being paranoid. I'm allowed to have a social life." Her dismissive tone made me feel like I was overreacting. I wanted to trust her, so I let it go. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The real cracks began to show a few weeks ago. I was working from home and overheard Jessica talking to Megan and Brandon in the kitchen. She was telling them about college and making plans for their future. At first, it sounded normal, until I heard her say something that made my stomach drop. "He doesn't need to know he isn't your real dad until you're done with college. He'll take care of us." I froze. My heart felt like it had stopped. Did I just hear that right? Megan and Brandon weren't my kids? And Jessica was planning to keep it from me for years while I supported them? I stayed perfectly still, hoping to hear more, but Jessica must have realized I was nearby because she abruptly ended the conversation. I heard her shuffling around in the kitchen before she walked into the living room, her face calm and unreadable. I spent the rest of that day in a daze. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd overheard. Was there any chance I'd misunderstood? The kids looked like me. At least I thought they did. But Jessica's words echoed in my head, and the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that she had been lying to me for years. That night, as Jessica sat next to me on the couch scrolling through her phone, I felt a surge of anger. How could she sit there so calmly, acting like everything was normal? I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I held back. If I was going to do this, I needed to be smart. I needed proof. After overhearing Jessica's shocking comment, I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, her words replayed in my mind. "He doesn't need to know he isn't your real dad until you're done with college. He'll take care of us." If what I'd heard was true, it meant my entire life. The past 10 years of love, marriage, and fatherhood was built on a lie. I needed to know for sure. But confronting Jessica outright wouldn't work. She was sharp, manipulative, and would twist things in her favor if I gave her the chance. If I wanted answers, I had to play it smart. The next morning, I called in sick to work and started doing some digging. My first step was going through Jessica's phone. She had left it on the kitchen counter while she showered, so I took the opportunity. Unfortunately, her phone was locked, and I didn't know the code. It was just another layer of secrecy that confirmed my suspicions. But I didn't give up. I remembered that we shared a cloud account for family photos and backups. I logged in from my laptop, hoping to find something that would shed light on what she was hiding. At first, everything seemed normal. Pictures of the kids, family vacations, and random selfies Jessica had taken. But then I found a folder labeled Personal. The folder was password protected, but I guessed the password after a few tries. It was her mother's birthday classic. What I found inside made my stomach turn. There were dozens of photos and screenshots, including messages between Jessica and a man named Brad. The messages were explicit, to say the least. They talked about sneaking around, their amazing chemistry, and how Eric doesn't suspect a thing. One particular message stood out. "Brad, Do you think he'll ever figure out Brandon isn't his? Jessica, not a chance. Eric's too clueless. As long as he keeps paying for everything, we're golden. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Not only had she been cheating on me, but she had blatantly admitted that Brandon wasn't my biological son. And based on the timeline in their messages, it was likely Brad was Brandon's real father. I wanted to scream, punch a wall, or confront Jessica right then and there. But I forced myself to stay calm. If I acted impulsively, she'd find a way to cover her tracks or spin the situation to make me look like the bad guy. I needed more evidence. That afternoon, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a private investigator named Tom, who came highly recommended by a friend. I explained the situation to him, and he agreed to start digging into Jessica's activities immediately. He assured me that within a week, he'd have solid evidence of her affair. The second call was to a lab that specialized in paternity testing. I requested 2 kits, one for Megan and one for Brandon. It felt surreal ordering paternity tests for the children I had raised and loved for years, but I needed to know the truth. Over the next few days, I acted as if nothing was wrong. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every time I saw Jessica, I had to suppress my anger and disgust. She would smile at me, make small talk, and go about her day like everything was fine. It was infuriating to watch her act so normal, knowing the secrets she was keeping from me. When the paternity tests arrived, I waited until Jessica went out for one of her girls' nights to collect samples from Megan and Brandon. It wasn't hard. I took a few strands of hair from their brushes and carefully sealed them in the test kits. I mailed them off the next morning, my heart heavy with dread. A week later, Tom called with an update. He had followed Jessica during one of her outings and confirmed that she was meeting Brad at a hotel. He sent me photos of them entering the room together, laughing and holding hands like a happy couple. The sight made me feel sick, but it also gave me the proof I needed. The next day, the paternity test results arrived. I opened the envelope with shaking hands, my heart pounding in my chest. The results confirmed what I had feared. Brandon was not my biological son. Megan, however, was mine. I stared at the papers, a mix of heartbreak and rage washing over me. Jessica had lied to me for years, using me as a safety net while she carried on with another man. She had let me believe that Brandon was my son, knowing full well that he wasn't. And she had the audacity to plan on keeping the truth from me until it suited her. That night, as Jessica slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. She had lied, cheated, and used me, and now she was going to face the consequences. I knew that confronting Jessica wouldn't be simple. She was a master manipulator, always able to twist situations in her favor. But now I had the paternity test results, photos from the private investigator, and her incriminating messages with Brad. This time, she couldn't talk her way out of it. I waited until the kids were at a friend's house for a sleepover. It was just the 2 of us, sitting at the kitchen table. Jessica was scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the screen, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Jessica glanced up, a hint of annoyance flickering across her face. "What about?" I pulled out the manila envelope containing all the evidence I'd collected. The paternity test results, the photos of her and Brad, and screenshots of their messages. I slid it across the table. Her expression shifted from casual disinterest to confusion as she opened the envelope. As she sifted through the documents, her face paled. For a moment, she was speechless. Then, in true Jessica fashion, she composed herself and leaned back in her chair. "What is this supposed to be?" she asked, her tone icy. "You know exactly what it is," I said, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "I know everything, Jessica. I know Brandon isn't mine. I know about Brad. And I know about your plan to keep lying to me while I paid for everything." She smirked, a cold, calculating look that made my blood boil. "So what? You've been snooping through my stuff, following me? That's pathetic, Eric." Her dismissiveness pushed me over the edge. Pathetic? Pathetic is lying to your husband for 10 years. Pathetic is letting me believe Brandon was my son, while you carried on with another man. You've been using me, Jessica, and it ends now. Jessica's mask of composure cracked, and she slammed her hand on the table. You're overreacting, Eric. Brandon may not be biologically yours, but you're the only father he's ever known. Does that mean nothing to you? I stared at her in disbelief. Don't you dare try to guilt me. You made this mess, not me. You've been lying to me for years, and now you expect me to just roll over and accept it? That's not going to happen. Her face twisted with anger. Fine, go ahead and leave if you're so perfect. But let me remind you, without me, you're nothing. I built this family. I raised these kids while you worked your boring job. You think you can just walk away? I'm not walking away, I said coldly. I'm taking back what's mine. You and Brad can figure out the rest. Jessica tried every tactic in the book over the next hour. She yelled. She cried. She blamed me for pushing her away, and she even tried to seduce me, but I stood my ground. Her crocodile tears and manipulative charm had no effect on me anymore. Save it, Jessica, I said, grabbing my keys. I'll be staying somewhere else tonight. My lawyer will be in touch. As I walked out the door, her voice followed me. You're making a mistake, Eric. You'll regret this. But I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life. That night, I checked into a hotel and called my lawyer, Melanie. I explained the situation, and she assured me we had a strong case for divorce. When I mentioned the paternity fraud, her tone turned serious. Eric, this is significant, Melanie said. We can pursue legal action against her for paternity fraud. It's a rare but valid claim, especially if she knowingly deceived you about Brandon's parentage. Do it, I said without hesitation. She needs to be held accountable. The next morning, I began putting my plan into motion. I froze our joint accounts, ensuring that Jessica couldn't drain them once she realized what was happening. I also contacted the private investigator to gather additional evidence that would strengthen my case in court. Jessica tried calling and texting me throughout the day, alternating between apologies and threats. I didn't respond. Her words no longer held any power over me. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was flooded with messages from Jessica. At first, I ignored them, but as the day went on, her desperation became evident. She'd gone from angry tirades to pleading texts, trying every tactic she could think of to get a response. Eric, please, let's talk. You're blowing this out of proportion. The kids need you. Don't abandon them because of a mistake I made years ago. If you think you can just walk away, think again. I'll make sure you lose everything. It was classic Jessica. Blame, guilt, and threats, all wrapped in a manipulative bow. But this time, I wasn't biting. I forwarded the messages to my lawyer, Melanie, who assured me they'd only strengthen my case. That afternoon, I received a call from Tom, the private investigator. Eric, you're not going to believe this, he said. Jessica's already meeting with Brad. They've been spotted together at your house. My stomach churned. At my house? What the hell are they doing there? Looks like they're packing some of her stuff, Tom said. But here's the kicker. Brad brought a moving van. The audacity of it all hit me like a freight train. Jessica wasn't even trying to hide her affair anymore. She was brazenly moving Brad into the house I had worked so hard to build. But instead of letting anger consume me, I focused on the opportunity this gave me. Get photos of everything, I told Tom. This will only make my case stronger. That evening, I received the photos Tom had taken. They showed Jessica and Brad laughing as they carried boxes out of the house. In one particularly damning shot, Brad was lounging on my couch, holding a beer. It was infuriating, but it also fueled my resolve. Jessica thought she had the upper hand, but she was about to find out how wrong she was. The next morning, I met with Melanie to finalize the legal filings. We were moving forward with both the divorce and a paternity fraud lawsuit. Melanie explained that while paternity fraud cases were rare, the evidence we had, Jessica's messages, the paternity test, and her blatant admission to Brad, made our case unusually strong. She deceived you for years, Melanie said. The court isn't going to look kindly on that, especially since it directly impacted your finances and emotional well-being. Meanwhile, Jessica's behavior became even more erratic. She started calling mutual friends and spinning a story about how I had abandoned her and the kids. I heard through the grapevine that she was telling people I was mentally unstable and had left her for another woman. Her smear campaign might have worked if not for the evidence I had. I began sharing the truth with close friends, showing them the messages and photos that exposed Jessica's lies. The tide quickly turned against her. People who had once believed her innocent facade started to see her for who she really was. But Jessica wasn't done. A few days later, I returned to the house with my lawyer and a court order that required Jessica to vacate the property. She had no legal claim to the house. It was in my name, and I had purchased it before our marriage. When we arrived, the scene was pure chaos. Jessica was in the driveway, screaming at the movers who were loading her things into a truck. Brad stood nearby, looking uncomfortable as he tried to calm her down. When she saw me, her face twisted into a mask of fury. "You think you can just kick me out?" she shouted. "This is my home too." "Not anymore," I said coldly, handing her the court order. "You have 24 hours to leave, or you'll be removed by law enforcement." She ripped the paper from my hand, her eyes blazing. "You're going to regret this, Eric. I swear, you'll regret this." That night, I stayed at a friend's house while Jessica and Brad packed the last of their things. It felt surreal, knowing that the life I'd built was crumbling around me. But I also felt a sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself, refusing to be a victim of Jessica's lies. The morning after Jessica was ordered to vacate the house, I drove by to ensure everything had been handled. The movers were gone, the driveway was empty, and the house was finally mine again. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. But I also knew Jessica wouldn't bow out quietly. She never did. Sure enough, later that afternoon, Melanie called me with an update. "Eric, Jessica's lawyer reached out," she said. "They're contesting the eviction and claiming that she has a right to spousal support due to her contributions to the household." I laughed bitterly. Contributions? She cheated on me, lied about our son's paternity, and moved her boyfriend into my house. What contributions? Melanie sighed. "It's a desperate move, and we'll counter it easily. But it's clear she's not going down without a fight." Jessica also ramped up her smear campaign. On social media, she painted herself as the victim of an emotionally abusive husband who had abandoned his family. She shared photos of the kids and wrote long posts about how she was fighting to protect them from their father's cruelty. It was infuriating to see her weaponize the kids in her narrative, especially since I had spent years raising them and giving them everything they needed. But I refused to engage. Instead, I focused on building my case and protecting myself legally. Then came the final straw. One evening, while I was sitting in my newly reclaimed living room, I heard a loud crash outside. I rushed to the window and saw Jessica standing in the driveway, a brick in her hand and my car window shattered. Brad was standing a few feet away, looking embarrassed but not stopping her. I stepped outside, phone in hand, recording everything. "Jessica, what the hell are you doing?" She turned to me, her face twisted with rage. "You think you can just take everything from me? You think you can humiliate me and get away with it? Go home, Jessica," I said calmly. "You're trespassing, and I've got this all on video." She screamed something incoherent, threw the brick on the ground, and stormed off. Brad followed her, muttering an apology under his breath as they got into their car and sped away. I called the police and filed a report, adding the incident to the growing pile of evidence against Jessica. Melanie assured me this would only strengthen my case. "Her behavior is completely unhinged," she said. "It's going to backfire spectacularly in court." The day of the courtroom showdown finally arrived. Jessica walked in with her lawyer, her head held high as if she hadn't been caught in a web of lies and deceit. Brad wasn't with her, which I found interesting. Maybe even he had finally realized what kind of person she was. The proceedings began with Jessica's lawyer trying to paint her as a devoted wife and mother who had been betrayed by an emotionally distant husband. It was laughable, especially when Melanie presented the mountain of evidence we had collected. The paternity test results, the photos of Jessica and Brad, her incriminating messages, and the video of her vandalizing my car. The judge's face grew more incredulous with each piece of evidence. By the time Melanie finished her presentation, it was clear which way the ruling was going. The verdict was a complete victory. The court granted me full ownership of the house, denied Jessica any spousal support, and ordered her to pay restitution for the damages to my car. As for the paternity fraud claim, the judge ruled in my favor, ordering Jessica to reimburse me for years of financial support I had provided for Brandon. Jessica's face was a mix of fury and disbelief as the judge read the ruling. She tried to argue, but the judge cut her off. "Mrs. Anderson, your actions speak for themselves. This court will not reward deceit and malicious behavior." After the ruling, I walked out of the courtroom feeling a weight lifted off my shoulders. Jessica had spent years lying to me, using me, and manipulating everyone around her. But now, the truth was out, and she was facing the consequences of her actions. After the court ruling, it felt like I had finally won. The judge's decision was clear. The house was mine, Jessica wouldn't receive a dime in spousal support, and she was on the hook for restitution and the years of paternity fraud. But if I thought Jessica was done causing trouble, I was sorely mistaken. The first week after the ruling, I didn't hear from Jessica at all. It was almost eerie, like the calm before a storm. I focused on rebuilding my life, organizing the house, reconnecting with friends, and setting up counseling sessions to process everything I'd been through. But then the calls started. At first, it was once or twice a day. Jessica would leave voicemails alternating between pleading for forgiveness and spitting venom. "Eric, I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Think about the kids. You're a heartless bastard for doing this to me. You've ruined my life. Please, just talk to me. We can work this out." I blocked her number, but she found other ways to get through. Emails, messages through mutual friends, even handwritten letters left in my mailbox. Each one was a mix of manipulative guilt trips and thinly veiled threats. One day, I came home to find Jessica sitting on the front porch. She looked disheveled, her usual air of confidence replaced by desperation. "Jessica, you can't be here," I said firmly. "You're violating the court order." She stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "Do you even care about what you've done to this family? The kids are confused, Eric. They're asking why you don't want to see them." That hit me like a punch to the gut. Despite everything, I still loved Megan and Brandon deeply, and the thought of them being hurt by this situation was unbearable. But I couldn't let Jessica manipulate me anymore. "I love those kids," I said. "But you lied to me for years, Jessica. You put us all in this position. Don't blame me for the fallout of your choices." She started crying, loud, dramatic sobs that felt more performative than genuine. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she wailed. "I was just scared. You don't understand how hard it's been for me." I didn't respond. Instead, I called the police to report her trespassing. When they arrived, she put on an innocent act, claiming she was just trying to talk to her husband. But the officers weren't buying it. They escorted her off the property, warning her that any further violations would result in arrest. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of fallout. Word spread quickly among our mutual friends and community about the court case and Jessica's actions. Her once pristine reputation was in tatters, and many of the friends who had initially supported her cut ties. Even Brad, her supposed partner in crime, disappeared from her life. From what I heard, he moved out of state, leaving her to deal with the mess she created. Meanwhile, I focused on the kids. Megan and Brandon were staying with Jessica, but I made every effort to see them regularly. Megan, being older, seemed to sense that something wasn't right. She'd ask me questions like, "Why doesn't Mommy like Brad anymore?" Or, "Are you mad at us, Dad?" I reassured her as best I could. "I'm not mad at you, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. I'll always love you and your brother." Brandon, on the other hand, was too young to fully grasp the situation. He treated my visits like nothing had changed, happily showing me his drawings and telling me about school. It was bittersweet, knowing he wasn't biologically mine, but loving him just the same. Jessica made one last attempt to sabotage me. She filed an appeal, claiming the court had been biased against her and demanding a reconsideration of the ruling. Melanie and I weren't worried. The evidence against her was overwhelming, but it was still a nuisance to deal with. The appeal was dismissed within weeks, the judge reaffirming the original decision. Jessica's desperation had backfired yet again, leaving her with mounting legal fees and even less sympathy from those around her. After the appeal was dismissed, I received an email from Jessica. It was long and rambling, filled with half apologies and excuses. "Eric, I know I hurt you, but I never stopped loving you. I made mistakes, but we can still fix this. Think about our family. Think about the good times we had." I stared at the email for a long time before deleting it. Jessica's words no longer had any power over me. I was done. After weeks of court battles, emotional turmoil, and Jessica's relentless attempts to claw her way back into my life, I finally felt a sense of calm. She had tried everything: manipulation, legal threats, emotional blackmail, but nothing worked. The court had ruled decisively, and I was moving on. Jessica's downfall became the talk of our community. The once polished and confident woman was now a shadow of herself. Mutual friends told me she was struggling financially, drowning in legal fees and restitution payments. Brad had completely abandoned her, leaving her to pick up the pieces on her own. I should have felt pity, but I didn't. Jessica had orchestrated her own destruction. Her lies, infidelity, and manipulation had finally caught up to her. She had underestimated me, thinking I'd be too weak to fight back. She was wrong. Meanwhile, I focused on healing. Therapy became a cornerstone of my recovery, helping me process the betrayal and rebuild my confidence. My therapist, Dr. Carter, helped me understand why I had ignored the red flags for so long and how I could avoid falling into similar patterns in the future. "You were trying to hold onto the family you thought you had," Dr. Carter said during one session. "It's natural to want to protect what you've built, even when the foundation is crumbling. But now you have the opportunity to build something real." Those words stuck with me. For so long, I had been clinging to an illusion, desperate to believe that Jessica was the person I thought she was. But now, I was free to create a life that wasn't built on lies. My relationship with Megan and Brandon was complicated but fulfilling. Megan, being older, started to ask more pointed questions about why her mother and I had split. I decided to be honest with her, at least as much as a 10-year-old could handle. "Your mom and I had some problems," I explained gently. "We couldn't fix them, and we decided it was better to live apart. But that doesn't change how much I love you and your brother." Megan nodded thoughtfully. "I know, Dad. You're always here for us." Brandon, on the other hand, was blissfully unaware of the deeper issues. He treated my visits like a continuation of the life we'd always had, and I made sure to cherish every moment with him. Jessica, however, was not handling things well. She had become more erratic, sending me angry emails and posting cryptic messages on social media about betrayal and heartbreak. It was clear she was trying to gain sympathy, but most people had already seen through her act. One day, I received a message from one of Jessica's former friends, Lisa. "Hey, Eric," she wrote. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for believing Jessica's lies about you. After everything that's come out, it's clear she was the problem, not you. You're a good guy, and I hope you're doing okay." It was a small but meaningful moment of validation. For so long, Jessica had tried to control the narrative, but the truth had finally prevailed. The final piece of closure came when Melanie informed me that Jessica had been ordered to begin making restitution payments. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to remind her that actions have consequences. Knowing that she was being held accountable gave me a sense of justice. As I moved forward, I started focusing on myself in ways I hadn't in years. I joined a gym, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again. It was a slow process, but it felt good to open myself up to new possibilities. One evening, I met someone, Rachel. She was kind, funny, and understanding in a way that felt effortless. We hit it off immediately, and for the first time since everything with Jessica, I felt a spark of hope. Rachel didn't pressure me to move quickly or share more than I was ready to. She just listened, offering support and laughter when I needed it most. It was refreshing to be with someone who wasn't trying to manipulate or control me. As weeks turned into months, I felt a sense of renewal I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of Jessica's betrayal no longer hung over me like a storm cloud. My days were filled with work, time with the kids, and a budding relationship with Rachel. For the first time in a long time, I was living for myself. Jessica, meanwhile, continued to spiral. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she had been evicted from her rental after failing to pay the rent. Her flashy lifestyle, funded by my hard work and her lies, had crumbled. Without Brad or her fabricated reputation to fall back on, she was floundering. One day, Megan mentioned something that stuck with me. "Mom says she misses when we all live together," she said casually. "She says you'll come back someday." I knelt down to her level, choosing my words carefully. "Sweetheart, I'll always love you and Brandon, but sometimes grown-ups can't fix their problems. Your mom and I are better apart, and that doesn't change how much I care about you." Megan seemed to accept this, but it was another reminder of how deeply Jessica's actions had affected the kids. She had created this mess, yet she was still trying to manipulate the narrative, even to her own children. My relationship with Rachel grew steadily. She was unlike Jessica in every way, patient, genuine, and honest. She didn't try to control me or force me to talk about my past unless I wanted to. Instead, she focused on building something real, one step at a time. One evening, while we were cooking dinner together, Rachel asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "Do you ever think about forgiving her?" I paused, considering her words. "I don't think I'll ever forgive her for what she did," I admitted. "But I've let go of the anger. Holding on to that only hurts me, not her." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's fair. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. It just means letting yourself heal." Her words resonated with me. For so long, I had equated forgiveness with weakness, but now I realized it was a form of strength. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant reclaiming my power. Jessica made one last attempt to insert herself into my life. She showed up unannounced at Megan's school during my scheduled pickup time, claiming she wanted to talk things over. When I arrived and saw her standing by the car, my stomach sank. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my tone calm for Megan's sake. Jessica's face was a mask of feigned innocence. "I just wanted to see you. We need to figure out how to move forward, for the kids." "We already have," I said firmly. "If you want to discuss custody, go through my lawyer. Otherwise, leave." Jessica's expression hardened, and she muttered something under her breath before storming off. It was another desperate attempt to regain control, and once again, it had failed. As time went on, Jessica's presence in my life dwindled. Her financial struggles forced her to move out of state, and our communication was limited to necessary updates about the kids. While I would always have to co-parent with her to some extent, I made sure our interactions were strictly business. Meanwhile, my relationship with Rachel continued to flourish. We took a weekend trip to the mountains, just the two of us, and it was there, under a blanket of stars, that I realized I could see a future with her. She wasn't just a rebound. She was someone who had helped me rediscover what love and trust should feel like. "I'm grateful for you," I told her that night. "You've shown me that it's possible to start over." She smiled, taking my hand. "You did that yourself, Eric. I'm just lucky to be part of the journey." As the dust settled and life took on a sense of normalcy, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. It was hard to believe that only months ago, my life had been torn apart by Jessica's lies and betrayal. Now, I felt like a completely different person, stronger, wiser, and finally at peace. The kids remained my priority through it all. Megan had adjusted well to the new arrangement, though she occasionally asked questions about why her mother and I couldn't reconcile. Brandon, as young as he was, treated every visit with me as if nothing had changed. I never brought up the paternity issues with him, and I doubted I ever would. To him, I was still his dad, and that was enough. Jessica's attempts to interfere in my life had all but stopped. After being forced to move out of state, she kept her distance, likely because her own struggles left her with little time or energy for anything else. Occasionally, I would receive updates through mutual acquaintances, but they were always the same. Jessica was drowning in debt, estranged from most of her friends, and struggling to hold down a job. It was the life she had built for herself, brick by deceitful brick. Rachel, on the other hand, had become my safe haven. Our relationship was a breath of fresh air, free from the toxicity and manipulation I had grown accustomed to. She was patient, understanding, and most importantly, genuine. With her, I didn't feel the need to constantly look over my shoulder or second-guess every word. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch of my house, Rachel asked a question that made me pause. "Do you think you're truly over it? Everything with Jessica, I mean?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. I don't think I'll ever fully forget what happened, but I'm not angry anymore. I've accepted it. Jessica's choices don't define me, they define her. And that's enough for me. Rachel smiled, squeezing my hand. That's a good place to be. Therapy continued to play a significant role in my healing process. Dr. Carter helped me unpack the deeper issues that had allowed me to stay in a toxic relationship for so long. I learned to recognize red flags, set boundaries, and prioritize my own well-being. Lessons I was determined to carry into every aspect of my life. One session, Dr. Carter asked me a question that stuck with me. If you could go back and change anything, would you? At first, I wanted to say yes. I wanted to erase the pain, the betrayal, and the years of deception. But then I realized that everything I had been through had led me to where I was now, a place of strength and clarity. No, I said, I wouldn't change anything. It hurt, but it taught me what I deserve. Dr. Carter nodded. That's a powerful realization, Eric. It shows how far you've come. As for Jessica, I had no desire to see her fail, but I also didn't feel responsible for her choices. She had tried to manipulate and control me, and when that failed, she had tried to destroy me. But in the end, she had only destroyed herself. I hoped, for the sake of the kids, that she would find a way to rebuild her life. But I wasn't holding my breath. The nonprofit work I had started volunteering with became a passion project. Sharing my story with others who had experienced similar betrayals gave me a sense of purpose. It reminded me that even in the darkest times, there's a way forward. One day, during a group session, a man approached me and said something I'll never forget. "You gave me hope," he said. "Hearing how you rebuilt your life made me believe I could do the same." It was a humbling moment, one that made all the pain I had endured feel like it had meaning. As more time passed, I finally felt like the person I was always meant to be. My life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. The chaos Jessica had brought into my world had been replaced with stability, happiness, and hope for the future. Rachel had become an integral part of my life. She wasn't just my partner. She was my friend, my confidant, and my biggest supporter. We took things slow, allowing our relationship to grow naturally. It was a refreshing change from the whirlwind romance I'd had with Jessica, which, in hindsight, had been built on shaky foundations. One evening, as Rachel and I were cooking dinner together, she surprised me with a question. "Have you thought about what's next for us?" she asked, her tone light but sincere. I paused, stirring the pot on the stove. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you see a future with me? With us?" she said, her eyes searching mine. I set down the spoon and turned to face her. "Rachel, you've shown me what a healthy relationship looks like. I've never felt so at ease with someone. Yes, I see a future with you. One that I want to build together." Her face lit up, and in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Jessica, on the other hand, had faded into the background. The legal battles were over, the restitution payments had begun, and she was living far away. I only heard from her when it came to co-parenting issues, and even those interactions were sparse and transactional. The kids were my priority, and I made sure they felt loved and supported, despite the upheaval they'd experienced. Megan had blossomed into a confident and curious young girl. She often asked thoughtful questions about life, and I made sure to answer them honestly, while always reassuring her of my love. Brandon, meanwhile, remained the same happy, playful child he had always been. My bond with him was unshakable, and I cherished every moment we spent together. The nonprofit work continued to be a source of fulfillment for me. One day, during a group session, I shared a piece of advice that I had come to live by. Pain doesn't define you, I said to the group. What you do with that pain, how you grow from it, that's what shapes your life. Don't let someone else's choices dictate your worth. You're stronger than you think. The words resonated with the group, and as I looked around the room, I saw nods of understanding. It was a reminder that my journey had meaning beyond my own healing. It was a way to help others find their way, too. One evening, as Rachel and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she reached for my hand. You've come so far, Eric. I'm proud of you. I smiled, squeezing her hand. I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my rock through all of this. She shook her head. You did it yourself. I just reminded you of what you already had inside you. As I reflected on everything I had been through, I realized how much I had learned. Jessica's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a catalyst for growth. I had discovered my strength, learned to set boundaries, and found love that was genuine and healthy. The life I was building now was one I could truly be proud of. If there's one thing I would tell anyone going through something similar, it's this. You are not defined by someone else's betrayal. You are defined by how you rise from it. The journey isn't easy, but it's worth it. And when you come out on the other side, you'll be stronger than you ever thought possible. With Rachel by my side, my kids thriving, and my life finally on track, I knew the best chapters of my story were still ahead. And this time, I was the one writing them.